Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. Today we've got a really special open coaching session with my good friend Des. He streams as well, so if you don't follow him already, you may have seen him on some of my live streams as well. I'll put the link to his Twitch in the description below. And if you're not subbed to the channel already, then we're going to have loads more of this sort of telemetry, open coaching, tuning style content in the new year, as well as the track guide. So hit the sub button, hit the like button, and comment below what you think about this video. Today we're around Misano in the 488 Evo, the new one, and we're just going to be doing a bit of a comparison between my lap and Des's lap. Just same conditions, same tune, same time. We even did it at the same time in real life as well. Give it a quick comparison, see what we can pick out from the video and the telemetry in a sort of half open coaching style session. So let's jump on board. First with Des's lap, we're in car view here. First thing to note is he's quite tight on the entry to the first corner, carries a lot of speed in third gear through there, which compromises his sort of speed into this second section. We end up doing a bit of a short shift through the right hander. We're not really squealing and holding on for dear life for grip through there, which you kind of should be. Nice line into this second sort of little mini section with a short shift into second, and actually flat from here, again using a little bit of a short shift all the way, using a lot of the track, which is absolutely perfect, onto this first little mini straight. First of the two really difficult trail braking scenes here at this Misano track, and first thing you notice is Des runs a little bit wide on entry. Didn't trail brake at all really there, so it's quite on and off the brakes, which compromised his exit. And again the same thing at this corner here, right? So he's off the brakes from now, gets a nice exit because he was able to sort of carry less speed into the corner than we're probably going to be able to ultimately after some further coaching on some trail braking. But absolutely fine line wise, nice and confident. Going into this fast section then, not using all of the track, a little bit of a correction on the brakes, probably braking a little bit too much on the white line. Comes across to the right hand side of the track quite a lot to brake, which is fine. A little bit of a twitch on the exit. And do we lift here? Yeah, pretty big lift going through the left hander, which is probably going to be flat in this car. And what looks to be a nice enough last corner. So solid lap, 1:33.9 is the time, so just keep that in mind, alright? Just jump on with me. Again, same sort of time, same conditions, same setup, everything. We turn in a bit wider than Des. We're taking this first corner in second rather than third, and we're sort of taking a bit more of a cut back line, which gives us a bit more momentum through this right hander. There's no need to short shift, and we're sort of holding on a little bit for dear life through there. Same braking point, similar sort of line through there. I'm actually keeping it in first a little bit longer, and I take a slightly quicker line through the first half, which compromises me a little bit through the left-hander onto this straight, and we'll have a look at the telemetry later to see which is quicker through there. I'm feeling Des might be a bit quicker than there through me. As I said, first of the big trail braking zones, holding onto that brake nicely into that section, using a lot more of the track on the exit, so carrying a little bit more speed. Again into the second one on these difficult trail braking, sort of long, slowish speed corners. Hold onto the brake a lot longer, take a tighter line through there, and still manage to get a relatively good exit. Similar sort of speeds, I think, going down the straight from what I can see. And remember, Des was more in the middle of the track coming through this section. We'll see how wide we are. So yeah, we're right out to the curb. No twitching because we've taken that wider line, and stay on this sort of ready tarmac a little bit longer than him to get a straighter exit from this hairpin. Pretty much flat, a little bit of a nervous lift, but I think on a proper hot lap that would probably be flat, and a little bit of an oversteer moment going around the last corner, but that's absolutely fine. So you can see immediately there are a few differences between our lap. Let's dive into the telemetry. So the first thing to explain just before we get into the nitty gritty of this is how this sheet is set up. There's 4 different areas that we're going to be looking at. I'm the coloured line, so the top graph I'm the blue line, and then green, red and orange obviously, and then Des is the white line. So you can already see there's a few differences, but at the top here we've got speed in kilometers an hour, we've got throttle input as a percentage, brake as a percentage, and also steer angle, which is a really interesting one, which we'll look at in a bit more detail in a little while. So what can we see from this initial viewpoint of us looking at the whole lap? Okay, so just a little bit of information on how to read this. Obviously this is the first corner here, going through the first section, braking down into the right hander into the first section. We'll compare it corner by corner and use the video to support the evidence as well. But immediately you can see there's some discrepancies in speed during this first section. And we saw that in the initial videos of the lap. We take quite different lines through here. Again, the next thing in speed that stands out to me is this corner, which is, I believe, turn 8. It's the first sort of left-hander in the first section, I think. Would that make sense? I know the right-hander after that. And there's this huge sort of discrepancy in speed, both on corner entry and then our minimum speeds that we look at, and then sort of catch back up down the straight. And again through this final section as well, you can see how we sort of cross over a few times here. There's more speed into it, and then have to lift through what is, I assume, the second last corner, and then into the final corner. I take more speed in and then less on the way out, as we know I have a little bit of a scruffy oversteer moment in that corner. So it's really interesting what you can sort of pick out from the speed graph alone. We'll look at these in more detail. We'll zoom in a bit more detail, but you can see there's sort of a few themes here as well. Is sort of on the orange line turning a little bit sharper than Des, although less here as I take a shallower line through that. But my peaks seem to be slightly more than him, which is the opposite from what I see in a lot of people. Do a lot of coaching, and the thing that tends to stand out to me, and we're going to do this again with someone else very soon. I'll put up another sort of open coaching session with that I'll record off the back of one of the actual sessions, is that people tend to turn a lot more than they need to, and they're scrubbing the tyres, which is potentially what's happening around this sort of the right-hander in the first section here. Sort of Des maybe turning a little bit too much and getting a bit of an understeer, but we'll see when we look at the video. So first off, let's just pause it here. What are we actually looking for when we're looking at this video, and everything that we look at while we're going around the lap, right? So there's a few key elements, things like car positioning, whereabouts it is on the track, how much of the track are we using, braking position, how fast are we braking, how long are we keeping the braking into the corner, is there any trail braking, how aggressive we are on the throttle, do they hit the apex, are we close to the apex, are we U-ing corners, are we V-ing corners. All these sorts of things contribute to what we look at on the track. So we can see that Des is on the left hand side of the track, but he actually starts turning in before the corner, takes a lot of speed through the first section, and has to sort of compromise by short shifting through the right hander here. If we look at it again and we break it down in a bit more detail, we see he starts turning in just before the corner starts. And we pause it here just on the apex at 89 miles an hour, okay, in third gear on half throttle, okay. So just bear that in mind. He's carrying a lot of speed through this first corner, and it's going to send him out wide. We get that kick of understeer come in. Now he's on full brakes, keeping a bit of throttle actually quite nicely to stabilise the car. And we're probably going to be dropping down into first gear. This is quite a narrow or shallow entry into this left-hander, which isn't probably ideal because the next corner is essentially a straight right. So we're down into second gear at 60 miles an hour, 4,700 revs, which I would say is probably below the limit of this Ferrari sort of capability in second gear. It's slow to pick up. We short shift again into third gear to try and keep that momentum. We didn't take a cut back line, and we're away into the next sort of section. Whereas we compare that to my onboard here, I'm slightly more left to start with. I actually turn in from a wider position. Let's pause it at roughly the same time. I'm on that sort of third half throttle situation here, but I'm doing 82 instead of 89 miles an hour, right, in second gear, much higher in the rev range. So when I'm on that throttle, it's more responsive. The back end of the car is turning round more. I'm actually steering more as well, and that leads me to have a much wider entry. I jab the brakes a lot harder than Des does here, but I'm not on that throttle because I don't need to keep the car as stable as I'm taking a more conventional line into this left-hander with 5 miles an hour up, and crucially 500 or 600 revs up in the power band as we're going through the left-hander, which sets us up nicely for a quicker acceleration and also a straighter acceleration. I don't need to short shift. I do get a little bit of a twitch because of that, so it's not ideal, but we end up carrying more speed down that little mini straight into this next corner. So let's just bring back the telemetry and let's analyse just that first section that we just watched. We can extrapolate out what's actually going on and have a look at what we saw in a video and how that compares to the telemetry data that we've got in front of us. As a reminder, I'm the coloured line, so the blue, green, red and orange. Des is the white line, just to make it really clear for you guys. And immediately you can see from the speed trace that Des is slightly later on the brakes than me into the first corner. Actually gains a little bit of time there, and he's carrying more speed all the way through this first corner. So what we saw, he takes more speed and into that apex point, which is usually about the slowest point just before you put on the power, or just after you've started to put on the power. And I think we paused it in Des's video 89 miles an hour. You can see here it's sort of 88.2, and I'm down best part of 6 miles an hour slower than Des through this first half of the first section. You can see the difference in lines that we take as well through the steering input. So Des is a lot more shallow with his steering, because he's taking a wider line, right? So he's taking more speed, not turning as much, so he's setting himself up not quite as well for the second corner. So I'm having to turn a little bit more to stay over to the right hand side of the track. And then we start to go into the left-hand phase of the corner, and now it's where this crossover point happens at about 90 odd miles an hour, 86, 88 miles an hour, where our different lines mean that we can take different speeds through the second half. So we paused it at the apex of the second corner. Again, I'm 6 miles an hour up on Des here, and I carry more of that. That enables me to carry more speed all the way through this first sector into the braking point for turn 4, really it is. So that's a speed trace, and you can see from the steering as well, I'm a bit harsher on my steering to start with, and then trail off nicely, and I take a flatter line through what is turn 3, the long right hander. That enables me to carry that more speed. It's only 2.5 miles an hour down that straight, but for this time period, 2.5 miles an hour is quite a lot. So we look at the sort of acceleration and braking traces again then. So if we look at the braking one to start with, this shows immediately that I do get on the brakes a little bit earlier and a little bit sharper than Des does, so I'm immediately up to full braking, whereas Des has this phase, a little slightly longer phase until he gets to 100% braking. But then as we turn into the corner, so you can see as the steering input starts just about here, I start to trail off the brakes. It's not a really dense trail off the brakes. It's quite a quick one, but it's still some sort of trail where I'm starting to turn, and as I'm starting to get towards full lock, I've come off the brakes. Whereas Des's braking is quite stop-start. It's quite sort of immediate on and off. So he has this on the brakes fully, and then we're off, then we're turning. Okay, and actually he starts to turn before he comes off the brake, so he'll probably, and we'll look at it again maybe, he'll probably have this initial phase of understeer, and then the car will grip, and there's where he feels like he can turn slightly less. Again, from the acceleration trail, these blips are the gear changes down, so you can see I take gears, I actually take a different gear into this corner, so I changed out one more time during this time, so I take it in second. He takes it in third. He's actually on the power earlier because he's taking that faster line through, so he can get on the power earlier, then has this longer phase where he's not on the power. I'm slightly later, and then I'm off and have this more gentle braking phase, so Des has to brake harder into the second corner, and because of that we're on the power actually roughly about the same time, right? I'm slightly faster to full power than Des is. Des sort of goes up to, what is that, 45%, something around there, 46%, and then gradually gets up to this phase where it's about 70%, and then he has the confidence to go full power, whereas I sort of have okay, I'm on the power a little bit, the car's turning, and then we can go up to full power. And because of that, you can see the speed trace is quite different along that little straight. So we can see from this first section that those differing lines cause changes in how much speed we can take into each area of the corner, as you'd expect, when we get on the throttle, how much we get on the throttle, how we can see an immediate sort of trend that Des is going to be quite on and off with his braking capabilities through this track, and that might be something to do with the car, might be something to do with how he's got his pedals set up, or the feel that he's generating from them, and immediately you can see that actually Des tends to turn slightly less than I do, unless he's sort of taken, this is just a product of the lines that we're taking through this final phase of the corner where I turn a lot less. So we'll see how that sort of generates during the rest of the track. But let's have a look at the second sector and see what sort of insights we can gain from there. So on board then into the start of the second little mini sector, let's call it. We're on board with Des again. Nice line into the right-hander. So we're going to pause it here at 67 miles an hour on that half throttle sort of scene, and it's key to look at a few things here. So he's turning quite a lot, so we're going to be right over to the right hand side of the track, which is going to set us up really nicely for the exit to the left-hander. So it's a super tricky sort of little section here, and we cut the track really nicely there, and we're full throttle through that left-hander, which is really good. So that's a really solid sector from Des. Absolutely happy with that. Going into the left-hander, braking all the way over to the right-hand side of the track, and you can see actually Des comes off that brake immediately. So we're doing 64 miles an hour even, completely off the brake, and we're just about in the corner. Because of that, he runs a little bit wide on entry, does use a lot of the track on the exit, but it's more of a, I feel like I should use the track on exit. Again, quite stabby on the brake. We're already off the throttle here, off the brake here, right? So we're not very close to the apex here at all. I would expect to see a lot more trail braking around this corner. So we need to be on the brakes right to the apex of the corner, and then instead of doing that little bit of throttle input, we're on the brakes, and as soon as we feel the nose biting, we're away on the accelerator. So let's have a quick comparison with my sort of lap. Again, a bit more trail braking. I'm just holding on to that brake, as you can see, a little bit longer into this first right-hander, which is going to gain us a bit more speed and rotation. Keep it in first gear a little bit longer. So, similar sort of thing. I actually carry more speed through this right-hander, but that doesn't set me up quite as nicely as Des sets him up for the left-hander. So, although we're faster here, I'm going to anticipate in the telemetry that we're going to lose a little bit of time because I have to lift. Because I'm a little bit nervous to go through this left-hander. We're actually not full power until we're almost past the apex there. So two contrasting styles through that section. Not sure which one's right yet. We can have a look at the telemetry, but probably it's one of those things where it's if you're more comfortable, then stick to it. A lot more trail braking into the left-hander. Similar sort of line though, and this is the key one that Des had really different sort of inputs here. So you can see I hold onto the brake a lot longer, and only now am I coming off the brake, and then I'm immediately off the throttle. So we actually have the same speed here as I paused it, but I'm much closer to the apex. Immediately back on the throttle, and where we are using all the track and down the straight. So really interesting comparison between the two. So let's bring up the telemetry and see what we can find. So let's hone down at the second section. So if we start from sort of just before the braking point into the right-hander, going through that awkward section which Des does really well, you can already see there's some little discrepancies into the heavy braking zone, the left-hander, and again into the heavy braking zone for the right-hander, and accelerate away up the straight. Let's take that quite large portion, but let's see if we can dive in a little bit more detail, and we can sort of look at this a lot more closely as well. So you can see on the way in that because we take that straighter line through because I take that straighter line through the right-hander, I'm a couple of miles an hour, or 1 and a bit miles an hour up on Des, and actually end up braking a little bit later than him. Not by much, but a tiny little bit. And you can see I hold on to that brake a lot longer than him. It's not a traditional sort of trail brake in the sense that it's a really long sort of iRacing trail brake style, but it's definitely holding on to it a little bit more. And you can see that actually because of that I'm able to keep more speed all the way into the corner. So here we've got a discrepancy of, what is that, 6 miles an hour, almost best part of 6 miles an hour there, maybe a little bit more here. Yeah, so a little bit more, which is quite a lot really. Our minimum speeds are roughly the same, so I'm slightly slower than Des, maybe not by much though. He actually his minimum speed is a little bit before mine, which is interesting to see. But then I get on the power quite a lot. Well, initially a bit hard on him, then I get a bit nervous, and so does Des, and we have this sort of yin-yang going on here. But ultimately, I carry a little bit more speed through this first half, and then you see that I have to lift, which is what we saw in the video, going into the left-hander. As you can see, we're sort of here on the steering curve, so we're almost at full lock. I get a bit nervous that I'm not going to hit the apex, whereas Des keeps it absolutely planted. You can see on the throttle trace I have a couple of little mini lifts, whereas Des is absolutely full throttle, which is great, which actually means that our throttle trace is or speed trace is pretty much identical, right? He's carrying a bit more speed into it, but it sort of evens out by the time we get up to 120 odd miles an hour. But through this initial phase, he's maybe a mile an hour, half a mile an hour faster, which is just absolutely brilliant. You can see again from the steering, it's pretty even through here. I turned maybe a little bit less through the right hander, but we know that's because Des was trying to keep on the right hand side of the track more, so that's absolutely fine. Coming into the first sort of tricky left hander at the end of the straight then, so we're braking down from 147-ish miles an hour. At the end of the straight, interestingly, actually, I'm a little bit up on Des, which is oh no, it's just that I brake slightly later than Des, absolutely minuscule difference. So, and again, you can see I actually carry a little bit more speed through the braking phase. So I'm sort of 5 miles an hour up, or 4.5 miles an hour up, which isn't to be sniffed at really when you're going through that braking phase. And you can see from this trail that I'm heavy braking the same as Des when I initially hit the brake even, and then I'm coming off that brake just slightly, and as I'm getting a little bit more confident, I'm going to turn into the corner. Again, it's not a proper trail brake, but it's just that little bit needed to slow down the car a bit faster, well, a bit slower even. And then again, minimum speed for me is a little bit less, but because of that, I'm able to power out the corner a lot more effectively. Even though our throttle traces are very similar, my line that I take is much better for in the acceleration zone. It's a lot straighter line. I tend to V the corner a little bit more than Des, as you can see here. Okay, so again, I'm sort of 2 or 3 miles an hour up on Des as we come into the next braking zone. Again, I'm slightly later on the brakes, just barely, super barely, and this is the corner I really wanted to hone in on. Okay, so let's make this a lot bigger. Remember, we've got speed at the top here, throttle, brake, and steering angle. We haven't really talked about steering angle that much. Okay, so let's go through these and see what we pick out. So again, let's look at the braking phase to start with. The first thing I'm going to point out is that actually I'm a lot quicker to go from 0 to 100 brakes than Des. I don't know if this is the pedal set that we're using. I'm on a Logitech G920, Des is on a Fanatec. But I'm a lot quicker to go from 0 to 100 on the brakes. You see, he actually starts before me and has this sort of smooth glide up almost to full brakes. I actually get there before him. So although I brake after him, I'm actually on full brakes before him. And then, what is this, halfway through the braking phase, I'm deciding that I need to come off the brakes a lot earlier and start to trail brake into this right hander, which is the awkward sort of turn 8, I think it is, where we paused it, where Des was a lot wider than us on entry. And that's going to show in this telemetry here, because as soon as I come off this brake here, look at the speed trace, how it changes, right? So Des is still on full brakes, and only now is he starting to come off the brake, so he's now not really decelerating. So if we take the difference here, it's 16 miles an hour. So at the max of 17 miles an hour, it just flicks up to in the maximum point difference in the braking zone for this right-hander. And not only is it this, I mean, that's a huge difference, and this is probably the biggest thing on the lap that I wanted to concentrate on and get across, that it is so key to trail brake on this sort of corner. And it's something that the guys from iRacing will preach a lot as well, but people who are coming from different games tend to be very on and off with the brakes. This is a prime example, okay, of how we can carry a lot more speed into the corner by sitting on those brakes. You can see I get a little bit nervous and I actually lock up a little bit on the video here, because I don't think I'm going to stop the car. So that's just, again, a little bit of inexperience on my side, but not too much. And you can see, again, my minimum speed is a lot lower than Des's, because he's braked a lot earlier than me. He's sort of coasting around this, sort of taking a longer apex through this little phase here, the white line. So it's pretty constant speed, sort of 55, 56 miles an hour. And then he gets the confidence to put on the power, although he has this sort of half throttle instance, and then he gets the confidence as the car bites, and then he's full throttle, whereas I'm much faster to full power than him from nothing, because I've done that initial sort of turning phase on the brakes. The next thing to point out is actually there's a huge gap between where my cursor is now, let's just change that line, where my cursor is now and where Des puts on the power. So we're coming off the brakes, and then there's this massive gap here before we get back on the power, whereas for me the gap is very small. So that's another interesting thing to point out. So let's look at the steering trace. I said I hadn't really talked about this too much, and I think the obvious thing for me to point out from this is that we have very different styles. I tend to be a little bit smoother, I think, than Des. You can especially see this on the exit at the corner. I get a lot of my turning done before the power is put on, and then I tend to come off the steering, open up the steering. I talk about my track guides a lot of the time. I do that as soon as I can. You can see from here on, my steering phase is a lot smoother than Des as I'm applying that power, and that shows along with a different line, because I start off 7 miles an hour slower as I start to put the power down than Des does, but because we're on that more ideal line, by the time we get up to 70 miles an hour, I've evened that out, and then it's we're ahead, not by much, but by a mile an hour, but for this long straight all the way down right to the end of here until so it only evens out at about, as the car starts to top out, at about 155 miles an hour. So really interesting thing to look at, the trail braking in that section. Let's dive into the final part of the lap, and then we'll get some conclusions and things for Des to work on as a bit of a coaching trick. So we're going to mix it up this time, and we're going to watch my lap first. Very different line through Des with this right hander actually. I start off a lot wider than he does. Let's just pause it here. My left tyre is basically on that curb, and when we're under full braking load, and it's not a very long braking phase here. It's quite a short, sharp, get the nose turned in very quickly. But you probably don't always need to hit the brakes fully here. It depends what car you're in really, and how you like to take this corner. But the key is to take as much speed as possible through it, because there's really no straight after it. Okay, it's just another braking zone. So we're 103 miles an hour on the apex here, full throttle, which is really key, so we're already back on that throttle nice and early, all the way out left, nice and wide. We hold on to the brake really nicely, braking on that white line on the left hand side, by the way, if you carry enough speed, holding onto the brake nicely, trail braking down to 45 odd miles an hour, nice and clean on the power, flick it over to the right hand side of the track, have a little bit of a lift here, but the apex speed is about 100 as we pause it. Bit of confidence through there. Actually get on the grass before the final corner, which causes us to understeer and then oversteer a little bit, so our speed is 89 as we start to just look over the bonnet to that curb on the right hand side, and away we are for another lap. So a relatively tidy last sector, a little bit of a moment, but nothing too major. As you come to Des's lap then, a similar sort of line into this first phase of the corner, but actually he's on the middle of the track a lot more than I am, and because you saw he was turning more than I did there, the back end had a little bit of a squiggle, a little bit of a squirm, which is just going to unsettle him a little bit. It's not going to be as consistent through this corner, so my tip to him would be to go to a little bit wider on entry to carry more speed. Again, he's 1 mile an hour down on apex, but he's taking a different line, so he's going to go out wider, which is going to compromise him, and he wasn't on full throttle. He immediately turns right in the braking zone, so he's actually cutting down the apex, so he's making this corner tighter than it needs to be, which isn't ideal really, but again holds onto the brake really nicely, sort of pulls it at a similar speed here. He's holding the brake right down into the 40s, which is absolutely perfect. Just that little bit of trail braking to help the car turn. Again, a bit tentative, bit of an oversteer moment, and a huge lift here, and you can see the apex speed is down and he was on less throttle, but then he absolutely nails the last corner, nice and cut on the inside, early to the power, and you can see it's 5 miles an hour up on where we are, which is absolutely brilliant. I love it when my sort of coaching people are quicker than me areas. Absolutely no sarcasm intended there. It's really great to see when that happens, so good on Des. Let's bring up telemetry for one final time and get those final thoughts. So again, let's bring up the telemetry and let's focus on this final sector over to this right hand side of the screen here. So let's make this final bit a little bit larger. So this first part, we're similar sort of speeds, both the cars sort of topping out in fifth gear, 157-ish miles an hour, and you can see that actually our braking phases are very similar. I'm a little bit longer than Des, which is absolutely fine, but I brake just slightly later than him, so I carry a couple of miles an hour through this braking phase more than him, and then it sort of equals out. We're pretty similar here, again maybe a mile an hour down on Des as we go through the apex. Well, I'm back on the power a little bit earlier than him because we're taking a slightly wider line, so we're talking very minuscule differences here, because Des's line through here is absolutely fine, just gets a little bit squirmy. If we had a graph on here which was sort of oversteer or angle of slip, then it might be we might be able to tell a little bit more from that. Actually, can we quickly do that? That would be absolutely brilliant if we could do that. I wonder if we do have, I think we do, yeah. So okay, absolutely perfect. So you can actually see, so this bottom graph here is the oversteer angle of the car, and you can see that Des, because he has that little bit of a squirm under braking as he starts to hit the brakes through the actual corner, he's oversteering more than I am, so he doesn't get to carry that speed through there. So that's a really interesting thing. But you can see on the final corner when we make a bit of a mistake, then my oversteer angle is far greater than Des'. His is sort of 0, mine sort of 5, which is really the maximum that you want to be. 5 is too much. Anyway, let's focus back on this first right-hander. Carries similar speed. I mean, the line is really similar. Okay, so one thing to point out in the braking phase for the right-hander, the slow right-hander, this is the hairpin, is that I actually come off the power a little bit later than Des, so I brake later than him. And again, I've got this immediate up to full brakes and then trailing off a little bit nicer than Des. He seems to have this sort of double phase of braking where I think this is because he starts to turn right during the phase immediately. He has a sharper sort of turn right axis here. Because he goes on the brakes and then has a bit of a pause and then thinks, okay, I should be braking fully now. So he's missed out on this area here, this chunk of full braking, which actually, even with that, I think because we carry a little bit more speed, because we brake later, we're able to carry more speed into the apex, so a good sort of 4 or 5 miles an hour more than Des. And again, the trail braking phase is a little bit better. He does it a little bit, but it's more of a stepped approach. It's just a bit smoother, although it really should trail out along to here before we just get on the power here. So something for me to work on there as well. And again, you can see from both the steering angle, which is the orange and white lines here, so just move that down a little bit. It doesn't quite show it. You can see that I'm turning less than Des. You can see it's quite a significant amount that I'm turning less than Des, because he feels like he needs to get into the corner a little bit more. You can see again, because of that, the oversteer angle is actually significantly more. As I said, anything above 5 is probably pretty on the limit of where you want to be in this car, although you can get away with this car being a bit more oversteering than others. But Des up at 8 degrees of slip there, which is quite a lot. And again, he's sort of off the steering and then back on the steering, and then it's a similar trace all the way through there. But this immediate phase here, where he has that little bit of a correction, you can see that in the telemetry there. Again, because of that, he actually gets out of this corner quite nicely and is carrying a bit more speed than us, sort of 2 miles an hour into this phase. As we start to turn into the left-hander, he has a little blip off the throttle here. I have a tiny one, but he has a bigger one. He comes off higher percentage, so he's down to 15-17% throttle, or 14% throttle even. And I'm the lowest I go is sort of 36. So it's still quite a big lift, but I'm immediately back on the power in some way to use the diff to turn the car. And because of that, I overtake him in this speed graph here, right? So from 2 miles an hour down, I end up being 2 miles an hour up. So that sort of initial acceleration phase from Des, which was really great, is sort of ruined by that just little nervousness. And I think after a few more laps, both of us would be absolutely flat through that left-hander. So it's kind of a negligible coaching point there. Again, into this final corner, you can see I actually get on the grass a little bit. I brake a little bit later than Des, and because of that, I'm carrying way too much speed into the corner. And if we just zoom out a little bit here, you can see that my sort of minimum speed is a lot later than Des, which is what's been happening to Des a little bit through this session, and he gets a lot more speed. His sort of best part was 6.5 miles an hour more than me through the acceleration phase onto the start finish straight. You can see because of that, I have to turn a lot more, and my oversteer angle is longer where I'm oversteering, and it's at a higher angle. So really interesting coaching point there. Don't oversteer into the last corner. Really good from Des to hold that nice and stable through there. So overall then, things to pick out for Des, I think I would come out a couple of key things. The first thing for me is trail braking. I think one thing that Des really needs to have a look at is how he trail brakes. This is sort of the graph that I'm going to show him, and this isn't an ideal trail brake. You can see how I'm using the brake to adjust how the angle of the car. I can actually turn slightly less than him when I'm on, slightly more than him when I'm on the brakes less, which does make sense. And I'm able to carry that speed. Remember, this difference was sort of 17 miles an hour through the braking phase, and because of that, I'm able to rotate the car more, get on the power, not earlier but harder, and that means that any time that's gained here during this phase is just lost immediately because I've got more momentum coming out of the corner. So I think the first thing for me would be work on trail braking. It's a really important skill in any sim, but on ACC and especially iRacing. So if he's looking at getting into that game, then really good to do that. And I think the second thing for me would be to just bear in mind that when you're on the power, get on the power quicker. We saw it a couple of times through the lap. Sort of this corner especially, again, I'm going to pick out that the acceleration trace is quite elongated from Des, who's a little bit nervous to get onto full power as I'm straight up there. You've got to trust the line that you're taking, which is really important, because if you're not quick on that throttle, then you're going to be compromised all the way down the straight, which is what we saw going after that sort of long right-hander. And the other thing, this is a minor thing, is we saw it a couple of times where Des wasn't completely sort of just directly going up to full braking, which is interesting. He seems to have a bit of an aversion to going full brake straight away, so I think that would be the final thing, just to slam on the brakes to start with before you start coming off them nicely. As you see, it's a lot smoother again on the brake trace. So a couple of key things to work from Des, but overall his lines are fine. I think once he starts to trail brake, he'll brake it more, he'll realise them and get into the corners a lot deeper and accelerate out of them a lot cleaner, and these sort of oversteer angles start coming down, as you can see, sort of through these sort of corners. So my yellow line's a lot less, although I think for today, guys, that's probably it. I hope that was really useful for you. It's definitely useful for me to go through this process myself, even though I do a lot of coaching just to find things where people are better than me at, so it helps on both sides. If you do like this sort of thing, we're going to be doing a lot more sort of open coaching, telemetry work, setup work on the channel in 2021. There's a lot of things to come. So if you're not in the Discord, I'll put the link in the description below. So get yourself in there, and also hit that subscribe button and the like button if you did enjoy this video. Thanks for sticking with me. If you got this far, absolute kudos to you, and I'll see you on the next one. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, guys. See ya. Bye.